Good evening. It's 8 o'clock. Good evening. It's 9 o'clock in Yerushalayim, and time to begin our time to begin our shir about Leil HaSeder. What we're talking about this evening is Kaddesh, the first element in Leil HaSeder, Kiddish. Of course, everything which could be said about Kiddish all year long for Shabbat or any Yom Tov applies equally for Leil HaSeder, and we're going to go over some of the key halachas. But in addition to what applies all year long, we have some special topics, some special issues which apply in Leil HaSeder. Let's take a look at the source materials and let the source materials speak for themselves. First, I'm going to quote the Mishnah Berurah, and as in all of my classes, I'm not going to bother to tell you exactly where I draw the sources from, because you have the sources exactly on the screen. So you could look up the context and check out the typographical errors which I've made, because I'm not a very good typist. I don't have to introduce the Mishnah Berurah. I'm sure everyone's familiar with it. Hard to point to a more weighty halachic authority of the 20th century, published just a shade over 100 years ago. These are his words. And incidentally, feel free to ask any questions you might have on chat. And if I see your question on chat, I'll be able to incorporate the answer into the ongoing shiur. Here's what the Mishnah Berurah wrote. Kodem Kaddesh, before you make Kiddish in Leil HaSeder, Sheratzeh Lekayem mitzvahs Kiddush. Before you say Kiddish, have in mind that you are about to fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush. This is true every Shabbat and every Yom Tov. Kiddush is, after all, a mitzvah of the Torah. It says in the Ten Commandments, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat lekadesho. The Kiddush is itself a mitzvah, and mitzvot, tzrichot, kavanah. Let's get that typed on chat. Mitzvot, tzrichot, kavanah. In order to fulfill a mitzvah, you must have intention that you want to do the mitzvah. Well, I mean, this is one which you're not going to be doing accidentally, is it? But it's one which you could do mindlessly. Unlike me, I'm always very mindful of everything I do. I mean, my mind never wanders, of course. But I've heard that some people do some things mindlessly without thinking about what they're doing. Well, you have to intend to do the mitzvah, which is normally the case. But remember that you're doing a mitzvah when you say Kiddush. That's also in Leil HaSeder. But Gam mitzvahs arba kosos. In Leil HaSeder, you're having in mind not only that you are fulfilling the ordinary mitzvah of Kiddush, but also you're fulfilling the mitzvah of arba kosos. After all, the 4 cups are a special mitzvah of Pirsum Hanes, publicizing the miracle of Mitzrayim, and that's also part of what you are doing when you are making Kiddush. Have that in mind. After all, Kiddush is the first of the 4 cups. That's what the Mishnah Berurah says, and that's fairly simple and straightforward. Yesh noagim, some people have the practice of actually saying out loud before they make Kiddush, Hareini muchan l'kadesh l'kayem mitzvahs arba kosos. Some people, in order to focus their minds and make sure that they will be doing the mitzvah mindfully, knowing, having in mind that it's a mitzvah, they will say, I'm about to fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush, the first of the 4 cups. Saying it focuses your attention. Some people actually have the minhag to say it out loud in order to focus their attention on what they're doing. Well, it's a minhag that some people have, and therefore quite commendable. Surely not going to mock people who do it. I'm surely not going to say they're foolish, but there's some distance between minhag, which some people have embraced, and something which is halachically required. It's of course not halachically required. What is halachically required is the mindfulness. Saying it might help you, in which case go for it if you want to say it. Kodem Haggadah Yechaven O Yomar Latzet Yidei Mitzvah Sipur Yisitz Mizrayim. Similarly, when you get to the Haggadah part, telling the story of the Exodus, have in mind that you're fulfilling the mitzvah of telling the story of the miracles of the Exodus. As with every other mitzvah, some people have the practice of saying out loud, I'm about to fulfill the mitzvah of telling the story of the miracles of the Exodus from Egypt. And then you also make a shechianu before you drink the wine. V'im lo beirech kodem shtir, if for some reason you're absent-minded and forgot to say shechianu before drinking the wine, levarech achakach, make a shechianu after you drank the wine. Matai yizkor, whenever you remember, whenever you realize that you forgot to say shechianu, then say it. B'yom Rishon, that's through the whole first day of Pesach. Last night in the Seder, I forgot to say shechianu. So say it in the morning, say it in the afternoon, say it whenever you remember. Afilu be'emtza hashuk, even if you happen to be walking, you're strolling outside. He says in the market, I don't know why you would be taking a stroll in the market on the first day of Pesach. It doesn't matter where you're out strolling, and you remember, last night in Leila Seder, I forgot to say shechianu. So say it while you're on a stroll somewhere during the day of Pesach. Zman regel koi, the bracha zman. Zman, it means the bracha of shechianu. The bracha of shechianu is called zman in Hebrew. The bracha on the time. We're happy that the time of Pesach came. Well, it is Yom Tov, and if you forgot to say the shechianu at the beginning of Yom Tov, say it in the middle of Yom Tov. Im nizkar b'leil sheni la'achar shekidesh hayom. If you live in Chutz La'aretz and have a second Seder, for some reason we could discuss on another series of shiurim. They have 2 days of Yom Tov in Chutz La'aretz. If you forgot to say shechianu on the second Seder, Yiftor atzmo b'shechianu shivarech al kos la'achar Kiddush. Well, if you forgot it, then if you forgot it on the first day, you're going to pick it up on the second day, and the second day will cover the first day as well. You don't have to say 2 shechianus. If on the second day you realize you forgot it the first day, you don't need 2 shechianus. 1 shechianu will do duty for both. Im shachach levarech shechianu b'kiddush leil sheni. If you forgot shechianu on the second night, right, in the Chutz La'aretz, people say shechianu twice, the first night and the second night. If you forgot it the second night, afilu iberach kvar b'leil rishon, even though you had remembered it the first night, remember the first night, forgot it the second night, chayiv levarech, then you still are obligated to make that bracha for the second Seder whenever you remember that you forgot it to the end of the Yom Tov, including the 8th day, which is D'Rabbanan and Chutz La'aretz. Bottom line, shechianu should be made the first night and the second night, if you have a second night, before drinking. If you forgot it the first night, say it whenever you remember during the first day. If you don't have a second day because you live in Eretz Yisrael, say it whenever you remember to the end of Yom Tov, 7 days. If you remember the second night, but not the first night, that will cover the first night as well. If you forgot the second night as well, then say it anytime towards the end of Yom Tov, through all 8 days. The Magen Avram, surely the most important commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, quotes the Rambam. Rambam says, Kiddush Hayom D'Raisa below Yain, V'Rabbanan Tiknu Yain. Now this is a little bit of a controversy, but the Magen Avram, quoting the Rambam, is representing here the majority view, the large majority of poskim. The idea is as follows. When the Torah says, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat, declaring that it is Shabbat, that's Kiddish. Kiddish is a declaration that Shabbat has begun, or Kiddish for Yom Tov, including Kiddish for Leil HaSeder. Kiddish, the saying, the speaking, is what the Torah requires. That you hold a cup of wine or grape juice in your hand, that's a rabbinic requirement. The wine or the grape juice is a rabbinic requirement. And let me just point out in passing as a footnote that just about all the poskim agree that wine and grape juice are halachically equal, absolutely equal as far as Kiddish is concerned, or Havdalah, or any other time when we are required to hold a cup of wine in our hands during a bracha, like in a chuppah, for example. A kos shel bracha can be wine or grape juice. The two are halachically equal, according to the vast majority of poskim. The reason being the slippery slope theory of halacha. There's a fundamental rule throughout the length and breadth of Torah that in order for any halacha to be a valid and acceptable halacha, the halacha must have a very precise definition where the halacha applies and where it doesn't apply. If we cannot define a very precise line where the halacha applies and where it doesn't apply, that's like a slippery slope. Though we don't have a clear cutoff point, there can be no such valid halacha. Now, why grape juice slowly ferments into wine over a period of time? It's a developmental process from grape juice at one end to wine at the other. Since halacha never defined any precise cutoff point at which the identity changes from grape juice to wine, since the halacha never defined any precise cutoff point, then halachically there can be no cutoff point, and therefore, according to the vast majority of poskim, wine and grape juice are halachically equal for any cup that we are required to hold while making a bracha. The words are a Torah requirement. The holding of the cup is the Rabbanan, according to the Rambam and the vast majority of poskim. The one major exception, the one posek who disagrees with all of this, well, there are several, but the big name posek who disagrees with all of this was the Igus Moshe, Moshe Feinstein. Now his opinions are quite weighty, although he's in a minority on this issue. But he held that although wine and grape juice are halachically equal throughout the length and breadth of Torah, that's true every place except in Leil HaSeder. In Leil HaSeder, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein held, unlike every other Kiddish, unlike every other cup used for a bracha, like under the chuppah, for example, or havdalah, unlike every other situation, Leil HaSeder requires alcoholic wine. That was the opinion of Rav Moshe Feinstein, minority view. His reason being that part of the Leil HaSeder is cherus, our expression of freedom. That's why we recline, to express the idea that we are free today and not slaves, the expression of freedom. After having been freed from, after Kaddesh Baruch Hu saved us from Egypt, the expression of freedom is part of what Leil HaSeder is all about. And wine without alcohol, it's the alcohol content which expresses the freedom. Doesn't matter how much alcohol, as long as you feel the effect of the alcohol a little bit. That's cherus. That's an expression of freedom according to Igus Moshe. So those who are following the opinion of Rav Moshe Feinstein and requiring alcoholic wine as opposed to grape juice, well, that's nice. That's commendable. We can smile upon that and say, that's a very fine performance of the mitzvah. On the other hand, someone who asks for advice, Rabbi, do I need wine or can I use grape juice? Well, in general, good halachic advice is to follow the majority of poskim. In this case, the overwhelming majority of poskim, grape juice is fine. Okay, well, bottom line, the cup is d'Rabbanan, unlike the words of Kiddish, which are the Torah requirement. Lachein, Magen Avraham has just learned that from the Rambam. Lachein, therefore, the Magen Avraham concludes, nearly, it seems to me, the midaraisa b'kiddush shama b'tfila sagi. Therefore, if you davened Ma'ariv before Leil HaSeder and mentioned in the tefillah of Leil Pesach, you mentioned that Pesach has started min haTorah. the tefillah, the words of tefillah, fulfill the Torah requirement of Kiddish. Zachor Yom Shabbat, same thing on Friday night. If you daven Ma'ariv on Friday night, Arvit on Friday night, the words of the tefillah are include a declaration that Shabbos has begun, and Minat Torah, you've done Kiddish. You still have a D'Rabbanan mitzvah of Kiddish with a cup of wine, but now it's only D'Rabbanan. Hare Zacharoto, you mentioned it. You mentioned Shabbat or Pesach in the Tefillah, Minat Torah, that's enough. Kiddush B'makam Suda, D'Rabbanan Tiknu, the idea that you repeat Kiddush again with a cup of wine at the beginning of the meal, that's a rabbinic requirement, and the Mishnah Brura, not surprisingly, follows this opinion of the Magen Avraham, which is the majority view. Now, a minority view also exists on this issue. I'm just going to mention it in passing so you know that it exists. If you encounter someone who is strict according to this minority view, you can smile upon them. The Orach HaShulchan is the minority view. He held that Zachor means with a cup of wine, and the holding of a cup of wine or grape juice is part of the Torah requirement of Kiddush, and therefore, according to the Aruch HaShulchan, you cannot fulfill the Torah mitzvah without a cup of wine in your hand. That's a minority view, but it exists. Let's go one step further. The Shulchan, one step backwards, the Shulchan Aruch says, Yehei Shulchano Aruch B'Ba'od Yom, that the table for Leil HaSeder must be set before Yom Tov, before sunset. You're not going to start the Seder yet. Seder is going to be later this evening, but the table must already be set, ready to go. Kedei lechol miyad kishetechshach, so that when the stars come out, when it's dark, when the stars come out, so you can begin Leil HaSeder immediately. You have to begin Leil HaSeder as early as possible at night. You have to wait for the stars to come out, but once the stars go, that's when the Shabbos would be over, right? At the time given for Shabbos being over on all the calendars, that's the time when three stars appears. That's the earliest time that you can begin Kiddush in Leil HaSeder. Yeah, it takes a while to get to the eating. Well, it depends how fast you go through the Haggadah, I suppose. You can do it pretty quickly, and indeed, some people will do it very quickly. You just imagine the the physician or the nurse working in the hospital, or the soldier who is on patrol and has only 15, 20 minutes for a quick Leil HaSeder. You can do it very quickly if you're under pressure. The uh, uh, Leila Seder should begin as early as possible, right at Seta Kochavim, right with the appearance of the stars. And your calendars will tell you what time that is in your time zone, or you can always use myzmanim.com. That's my favorite go-to internet site for establishing halachic times during the day. Before Pesach, you can check on myzmanim.com what time the stars appear wherever you are in the world. Now, why do you have to start the Leil HaSeder so quick? The Shabbos meal or Yontif meal, we're not makpid, we're not strict to begin as early as possible. You're hungry, you want to get to it, but there's no halachic drive to begin as early as possible. In Leil HaSeder, we do begin as early as possible. Rotzeh lomar, Shulchan Aruch means to tell us, Lihizdarez, you have to hurry up and get Leil HaSeder started. Yes, this means davening Ma'ariv before Tzeta Kochavim, if possible. Kaddesh lo yishnu hatinokot, so that the children will not fall asleep. Much of what Leil HaSeder is about is the children. That's what the whole purpose of the story. Well, even if you don't have children, even if you're all by yourself, you're still going to say the Haggadah to yourself. You're still going to tell the story to yourself. But if you have children, much of the story revolves around telling the children about the miracles of the Exodus. Well, you don't want them to fall asleep before you get to the end. So you begin as quickly as you can. Once you give the children to eat, then they're going to fall asleep pretty quick. So you want to get started as promptly as possible. And if you're accustomed to beginning your Shabbos meal or an ordinary Yontif meal not right away, and now for Leil HaSeder you make a big point of rushing to get started, that'll be another reason why the children will ask Manishtana, what's different about tonight? Why are we in such a rush to get started? Yashiv Lehem, you answer the children. You tell the story of the Exodus from Egypt. Well, someone has pointed out on chat that according to what we've just seen, one should daven Ma'ariv before the appearance of the stars, so that you can be home at the appearance of the stars in order to begin Leil HaSeder straight away. And that is indeed what all Jewish communities everywhere in the world did from as early as we have historical records in the early Gaonic period, in the early Middle Ages, through the middle or towards the end of the 17th century. It was first in the middle or towards the end of the 17th century that people started davening Ma'ariv a little bit later, after the stars appeared. But that's a modern development which deserves a separate historical analysis about how and why that happens. In any event, when we come to actually begin Kiddish, the first step, the Ramah in the Shulchan Aruch, these are the words of the Ramah in the Shulchan Aruch, Baal Habayit lo yimzog ba'atzmo. The Baal Habayit, the head of the household, the pater familias, the head of the household, should not pour the wine himself into the Kiddush cup. Rak acher yimzog lo derech herut. Someone else should pour the wine from the bottle into the Kiddush cup for the head of the family to make Kiddush. This would be an expression of cherut. After all, part of freedom is not being a slave, having someone else pour the wine for you. Now, this might sound a little bit off key to you. It surely sounds a little bit off key to me. Yeah, the historical reasons why anyone who's interested in this historical switch from davening Ma'ariv before sunset to davening after the appearance of the stars, that's something which happened in the 17th century. Feel free to send me an email. I'll be happy to discuss that privately with you. The uh, uh, like good grief, like I personally would feel very uncomfortable if I had a servant pouring the wine for me, like maybe that's crazy, but that's just the way I would feel. I wouldn't feel good about it. Uh, but yeah, in certain societies, in certain places, in certain times, well, of course, the free person doesn't pour his own wine or her own wine. You have the servant do it for you. Well, if you live in such a society, I suppose that Shulchan Aruch says that's what you should do. Have someone else pour it for you. Alternatively, pick yourself up and get yourself out of that society. The the Shulchan Aruch uh, implies this as well. The Ramah says it flat out in the Shulchan Aruch. Don't pour your own wine. Have someone pour it for you. The Ramah, the Shulchan Aruch doesn't actually say it, but implies it. Mozgin lo kos rishon. The first cup of wine gets poured for him. Right? The first cup gets poured for him clearly implies that he's not doing it himself. He's having someone else do it for him because he's free and has servants who will do it for him. Well, well, it's difficult for me to. I'm just uncomfortable with the whole thing, and fortunately, I'm not the only one who's uncomfortable with all of this. The Aruch HaShulchan, Rabbi Yechiel Michal Epstein, the great Rav Nevardik, who I actually value more than the Mishnah Berurah. I even think he was a few notches above the Mishnah Berurah in as far as weight is concerned as a great posek. Also from the beginning of the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. This was published just a few years after the Mishnah Berurah was published. He knew exactly what the Mishnah Berurah said. In fact, he occasionally quotes the Mishnah Berurah when he disagrees with it, as in this case, he's going to disagree with the Mishnah Brura. The Aruch HaShulchan mentions this business. Yeah, I too had technical difficulties. The he mentions this business of having someone else pour the wine for you, not pouring it yourself from the bottle. Anu e nizharim bazeh. This is a minhag which we don't follow. Aruch HaShulchan said we pour our own wine, even if you are wealthy, and there were wealthy people in Navarnik back in his days, end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. There were wealthy people, not many. I mean, most of them lived in dire poverty, grinding poverty. But even if you have servants, we pour our own wine. Ki nireh kiramut rucha litzavot leishto shetimzo. Telling someone else, pour my wine for me, that's an act of pridefulness. That's an act of haughtiness. I'm just too good to pour my own wine. Let's have someone else do it for me. Well, we don't go for that. We strive for some modesty. We pour our own wine, even if you're wealthy enough to have servants serving your meal in Leil HaSeder. Ein Baal Habayit Odif Mimenu. The head of the household is not better than anyone else, and therefore can pour his own wine, and that's the way we do it. Lachein noagim lemzog ba'atzmo. We pour our own wine. We don't follow this minhag. What should you do? Well, you'll decide yourself what you want to do. People, as uncomfortable as I might feel, having someone else pour my wine for me as though I'm somehow better than they are. Someone who is following this minhag, it is mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch. It is mentioned in the Poskim. There is a source for it. As uncomfortable as I am, I'm not going to object to someone who asks other people around the table, please pour my wine for me. I'm not going to make a fuss over this. If someone wants to follow the minhag, there is a source for it. Now, we come to the most important halacha here, as far as Leil HaSeder is concerned. Don't make Kiddish until it's dark. That means 3 stars have appeared. This is not a halacha of Shabbos. This is not a halacha of Yom Tov. Of course, you can have Tosefet. You can add extra time to the beginning of Shabbat and accept Shabbat before sunset, even if you wish. That's good and commendable to accept Shabbos earlier, and you can make Kiddish even before sunset. There's no reason to wait for the stars to appear. And that in general is true on Yom Tov as well, but not Leil HaSeder. Leil HaSeder, you have to wait for the stars to appear in order to make Kiddish. The Mishnah Brura says the reason for this is the meaning of the Shulchan Aruch is la'achar tzeta kochavim. The Shulchan Aruch didn't actually use the words appearance of the stars. The Shulchan Aruch only used the words darkness. But when the Shulchan Aruch says it's dark, what the Shulchan Aruch means is the stars have appeared. That is the opinion of the Mishnah Brura, and just about all the poskim follow that. Further, the Mishnah Brura said, wrote lo tema kevan shemitzvah lemaher yatchil kiddush v'hagadim ba'od yom. Don't make the mistake of thinking that since we want to hurry up and start Leil HaSeder as quickly as possible, therefore it's okay to make it before, it's okay to start before the stars have appeared so that the children will not fall asleep. Don't make that mistake. Poskim tend to be older people. You don't get to the status of being a great posik until you're an older person. And I suppose the great poskim were all very happy to talk about children falling asleep in Leil HaSeder. But the truth is, you get to a certain age where staying awake becomes difficult, and particularly in old age homes. Well, or even in my own home, staying awake beyond a certain hour gets to be difficult at a certain age. Well, don't make the mistake of thinking just because in your age, very young or very old, don't make the mistake of thinking that just because of your age, you're afraid you're going to fall asleep, therefore it's okay to start before the stars have appeared. Shabbos v'yontif, you can add extra time at the beginning and make Kiddush even before sunset, but not in Leil HaSeder. You can't start before before the stars appear. That's the time when Shabbat would be over on the calendars. Kol mashmalan, this implies that as far as Pesach is concerned, um, uh, since Kiddush is part of Leil HaSeder, and since Leil HaSeder is largely about eating the korban, the sacrificial animal, true, we don't have it nowadays, and since regarding the sacrificial animal, it says in the Torah, al matzot u'merorim yochluhu, you eat the sacrificial animal together with matzah and bitter herbs, Pesach eno ne'echal ela b'layla, and since the verse makes clear that the korban, the sacrificial animal, can only be eaten at night, the achlu et abasar b'layla hazeh, the verse says you eat the lamb at night, since the lamb can only be eaten at night, and Kiddush is for the purpose of eating the lamb. What does it mean, Kiddush is for the purpose of eating the lamb? Kiddush, in concept, from the halachic point of view, what Kiddish is all about is Kiddish is a matir. Let's get that typed correctly on chat. Kiddish is a matir. Kiddish permits eating. It is prohibited to eat or drink on Friday night or Yom Tov night, surely on Pesach night. It is prohibited to eat or drink until you have made Kiddish. Kiddish permits eating and drinking. Well, since Kiddish is permitting eating and drinking, and since what you're going to eat or drink is the matzah, and well, back in those days, the lamb, the korban, and since the eating has to be at night after the stars have appeared, the kiddush must also be at night after the stars have appeared. Kiddush tzarich liyot b'shar ru'uya lematzah. You cannot permit eating matzah when it's not yet permitted to eat it. You're allowed to do the mitzvah only at night, and so it's not yet permitted to eat matzah before the stars have appeared, and therefore it's impossible to make Kiddush, the whole purpose of which is to permit eating the matzah. Kiddush must be after the stars appeared. Further, kos shel Kiddush u'echad ma'arba kosos. For a further reason for making Kiddush after the stars appear is that Kiddush is the first of the four cups, and all the four cups are part of Leil HaSeder, and Leil HaSeder must be at night. Now, up to this point, for most families, it's not going to be a big problem. But for some people, like the elderly or those with small children, or people who are sick, people who are ill, or soldiers who are out on patrol on Pesach night, or medical staff in the ambulance drivers, but people who are going to have difficulty in budgeting their time might have great difficulty with this issue, especially the soldier or the surgeon or whoever it is who's going to be busy, very busy, all night long. His or her shift in the hospital, his or her shift as an ambulance driver, his or her patrol that they're doing in the army in order to protect the population is going to be all night. Well, can they begin Leil HaSeder before? According to what we've seen so far, no, you cannot begin Leil HaSeder before the stars appear, even if you're going to be busy saving people's lives in the army or in the hospital or whatever it is, even if you're not going to have time later, well, you still can't begin early. On the other hand, the Maharil, one of the early Ashkenaz poskim, wrote, Tam shematchilin Kiddish b'layla mishum tibul rishon. The whole reason we begin Kiddush at night is because the first act of eating, the first tibul rishon, the first dunking of the whatever it is you use for karpas, that has to be at night. Shar Haggadah tzarich liot b'layla. According to the Maharal, the eating, the karpas is the first thing you eat. That has to be at night. The rest of the of the Haggadah has to be at night, but Kiddush can be a few minutes before nightfall. You could at least do Kiddush a little bit before the stars appear, according to the Maharil. That lenient opinion exists. Now, based on this, the Kaf HaChaim was written by Rabbi Sofer in the beginning of the 20th century here in Yerushalayim. This is a sefer which is of immense weight in the Sephardic world. This sefer occupies a position of honor in the Sephardic world, very similar to his contemporary, the Mishnah Brura. Just as the Mishnah Brura is worth at least 20 points in any Ashkenaz discussion of halacha, similarly, the Kaf HaChaim is worth at least 20 points in any Sephardic discussion of halacha. And since the halacha we're talking about at the moment is not subject of controversy between the Sephardic and Ashkenaz poskim, well, each is of equal weight for the other team. If we were talking about a halacha which is the subject of controversy between Sephardic and Ashkenaz authorities, so of course everyone would follow the rabbis on their team. But in this case, this is not a controversial issue which breaks down along party lines, which breaks down along Sephardic Ashkenaz lines, and therefore the opinion of the Kaf HaChaim is of great weight even for Ashkenazim. He says as follows, B'diavad, and I cannot emphasize, B'diavad, and I cannot emphasize the importance of this term, B'diavad, if you made a mistake and did things wrong. Sometimes you do something wrong and it completely destroys, ruins the performance of the mitzvah. You have to do it all over again. Sometimes certain mistakes, the mitzvah is still accomplished, still done. You don't have to do it again. That's the concept of b'diavad. Those mitzvahs, not every mitzvah, but those mitzvahs which have certain requirements that you should do it a certain way, but mistakes can be overlooked. B'diavad, if you made a mistake, and Kiddesh miba'od yom, you made Kiddish while it was still daylight. You made Kiddish while, if you maybe you shouldn't have done that, but if you did, you made Kiddish while it's still daylight. V'chein binyan Haggadah v'achilas karpas, and similarly, as far as the Haggadah is concerned, and the first act of eating, karpas, even if you did that while it's still daylight, imasim miba'od yom, you did it before sunset. Yotza, you did fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush, Karpas, and Haggadah. The matzah has to be at night. The verse of the Torah says flat out, matzah b'layla hahu, matzah has to be at night. And if you ate matzah before 3 stars appear, that ruins the mitzvah entirely. You have to eat it again after the stars appear. But everything leading up to the matzah, b'diavad, if you made a mistake and did it during the daylight, you are yotzei b'diavad, you fulfilled the mitzvah, and that gives you plenty of time to begin much earlier, and you time the pace of Leil HaSeder, so you'll get to the matzah when the 3 stars appear. B'diavad, that's satisfactory. Now, in a different series of shiurim, we would discuss exactly when and where. We would discuss under what circumstances it is permissible to go ahead and do something in a way that you will fulfill the mitzvah, at least b'diavad. Some things are perfectly clear and don't require much discussion. Someone who is unable to fulfill a mitzvah in the correct way, but could, someone who is capable of fulfilling the mitzvah in a way, it's not the way you're supposed to do it, but it is a fulfillment of the mitzvah, of course you should go ahead and fulfill the mitzvah, at least in a way which will be satisfactory b'diavad if you're unable to do it correctly. And therefore, people who are unable to do Leil HaSeder correctly, namely beginning Kiddush after the appearance of the stars, they're unable to do that for whatever problems they have in life. If they can do everything much earlier, as long as they pace the timing in a way that matzah will come after the appearance of the stars. That's if you're unable. Now, in a separate series of shiurim, we would broaden the discussion what about someone for whom it's very difficult to do the mitzvah correctly? Is there room for leniency for someone who's not only impossible to go ahead and do it correctly, just very difficult to do it correctly? Okay, can we advise that person to go ahead and do the mitzvah in a way which is not exactly right, but would be a fulfillment? That's a subject for a whole new discussion, which we're not going to get into tonight. You can discuss it with your local Orthodox rabbi if you're in such a situation. If it's impossible to make Kiddish after the appearance of the stars, feel free to do it earlier, as long as matzah will be after appearance of the stars. It's merely difficult. That's a separate discussion. Achilas matzah, mora, iskashla pesach, everything which the Torah associates with eating the sacrificial lamb, namely matzah and bitter herbs, eat them all together, that has to be at night. And if you did it before the appearance of the stars, you're not yotzei at all. And he's basing himself on the Sefer Shulchan Gavoa. Now, let's continue with the quotation from the Kaf HaChaim, and then we're going to take a look at the words of the Shulchan Gavoa and see how this can be applied more broadly. The words of the Shulchan Aruch are as follows. We've seen this already. Lo Kaddesh ad shetechshach. The Kaf HaChaim quotes the Shulchan Aruch. Don't make Kiddush until it's dark. Namely, Mechadikasu of Baal Trumas Hadeshin. The Shulchan Aruch is paskening like the Trumas Hadeshin. Trumas Hadeshin is a sefer which is written by Rabbi Moshe Isserlin. You have the details on the screen. He's the one who first said that Kiddush must be after the appearance of the stars, and that is the opinion embraced by the Shulchan Aruch. Kiddish v'hagada v'achilas karpas prita deyatsa b'diavad rubod yom. Despite this, it's obvious to me, the Kaf HaChaim writes, that everything can be done during the day if you have no choice, as long as the matzah, or when the Beis HaMikdash is rebuilt, the eating of the sacrificial lamb will be done at night. We, of course, follow the Shulchan Aruch if we are able to, and therefore, since Yotza Mepume Damar, since the words that you should wait until after dark came out from the holy mouth of the author of the Shulchan Aruch, since the holy Shulchan Aruch said you should wait until dark for Kiddush, that's what we do if we are able to do so. But for someone who can't, start earlier, as long as you get to matzah after the appearance of the stars. And for someone for whom it's merely difficult, well, I'm not going to get into defining what constitutes difficult. Let's leave that for a private discussion with a local Rav. Yeah, Shema Yisrael. It's also, yeah, Shema Yisrael. Well, let's leave Shema Yisrael also for a separate thing. Okay. Omnam, Medivrei Maharil. You remember, on the previous screen, we learned that there's this controversy between the Maharil and the Trumas Hadeshin. Trumas Hadeshin was the one on the previous screen who told us Kiddish must be at night. Maharil was the one who taught us everything can be done before night as long as matzah is at night. Okay, we have this controversy. Okay, therefore, near the dafka bekiddish yesh lomad yatsa mishum safek brachas lahakel, since Kiddish is durabanan, the rule is that we can follow the lenient opinion where there is a suffix, where there's a doubt about which opinion to embrace. In a durabanan, we can embrace the lenient opinion. And therefore, the Kaf HaChaim sees clear room to make Kiddush earlier as long as the timing is correct. Now at this point, we're left with a little bit of a muddle, a little bit of a difficulty in making heads or tails out of what the contemporary poskim say. Here's the problem. The problem is that there's a long list of contemporary rabbis, great rabbis today, who've written extensively. Several shelves full of svarim have been filled with what to do if someone finds it difficult to wait until the stars appear before making Kiddish and Leila Seder. This is a popular topic. A huge amount has been written about this problem, particularly in connection with old age homes, where at a certain age people tend to fall asleep earlier, or with children, whatever it is. This is a big topic. And at this point, I begin to wonder, why is this a big topic which deserves so much discussion? After all, we have before us the opinion of the Maharil, which is embraced by the Kaf HaChaim, uh, and the opinion makes such perfect sense. It's so really the reasonableness of this opinion is itself compelling, since everything up to the eating of matzah is d'Rabbanan. Why not follow the lenient opinion and begin everything much earlier, as long as eating matzah will be at night? That would seem to be the simplest, most straightforward solution to the problem, which leads to the question, why, oh, why is this discussed so much? Let's take one more perspective before we can tie this together and draw some conclusions. The opinion of Rav Dov Leor. Now, Rav Dov Leor, he retired quite recently, but he was for many years the Rav in Hebron, just south of where I'm sitting at the moment, and uh, um, you might or might not be sympathetic with Rav Leor's political positions on this or that, but from the as far as his halachic discourse is concerned, he was one of the great. He is still. He's retired now, but he's still active. He's one of the leading authorities in the Dati Le'umi world, in the world of religious Zionism today. He has certain political views which have alienated him from some of my neighbors who tend to be Haredim. But, well, let's leave politics aside. Unfortunately, Rav Leor has published very little in his own name. Most of his opinions, which are so precious, we know about because other poskim have quoted him. In this particular case, Rav Moshe Harari, in this Sefer Harare Kodesh, quotes the opinion of Rav W. Rav Moshe Harari, whom we're about to quote, is also one of the major poskim in the 20th century in the Dati Le'umi world. In any event, let's see the opinion of Rav Dov Leor. These are his words. Hayalim, soldiers, hayotzim lebivtza, who are out on patrol, lifnei alayla, their duty begins before nightfall. Pesach is coming. Soldiers have to work on Shabbos. This is our pikuach nefesh, in order to preserve security here in this part of the world. We need the army to do what it's doing. That's pikuach nefesh. And even though violation of Shabbat is involved and violation of Yom Tov, that's the correct thing to do. And they go out on patrol before night. They have certain hours when then different soldiers will take over for the next shift. The patrol begins before night. Lo chazrim adalot shachar, and the patrol is going to keep them out of the base until morning. They're not going to return to the base until morning. They're going to be on duty, typically with the jeeps, following or walking, following a specific route, patrolling the area to make sure that there are no penetrations. In the more Haredi plugot, in the more Haredi sections of the army, the 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 jeeps will be driven by a non-Jewish driver, and the Jewish soldiers will ride along with them in the less Haredi plugot, in the less Haredi sections of the army. These Jewish drivers, which halachically speaking is permissible because it's all part of pikuach nefesh, but those who wish to be machmir, if you have the ability to have a non-Jewish driver, that's of course advantageous. Similarly, you yourself, if you are engaged in pikuach nefesh, life-saving, you are the surgeon, you are, well, whatever it is you do, you are the firefighter, and saving people's lives. Well, if you could equally have a non-Jewish driver, if that would be equal to doing it yourself, no loss of time, no loss of efficiency, everything would be equal. Having a non-Jewish driver, that's nice, that's nice. But of course, if you choose to drive yourself, that's also correct to do if you are engaged in a life-saving procedure. So here we have the soldiers out on patrol from before nightfall through the whole night until the morning. They're not going to have any time at all for Leil HaSeder. You can't take 15 minutes out in the middle of patrol to say, oh, okay, we're just going to sit here and do Leil HaSeder. You can't do that. They have a duty which they have to perform. Just imagine the surgeon in the middle of the operation saying, okay, guys, it's Leil HaSeder. Let's pause surgery for 15 minutes. Everyone race through the no, yeah, you can't do that. And if the surgery, either a single surgery is going to occupy the surgeons and the nurses and the anesthetists are going to occupy them all night long, or maybe successive surgeries, they're one after another, and they're really in a rush to get through, well, the reason they're doing surgery so late at night is because it's an emergency procedure. Well, they simply don't have time for Leil HaSeder. Well, these soldiers, these medical personnel, these people who are engaged in life-saving and therefore have no time for Leil HaSeder after the stars appear, הם pashut paturim. They are simply exempt from the mitzvah of Leil HaSeder. Medin osek b'mitzvah pater min mitzvah. After all, the rule is throughout the length and breadth of Torah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not expect you to do more than one mitzvah at a time. If you are actively engaged in the performance of a mitzvah, that is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to do, and you do not have to simultaneously juggle a second mitzvah. Active performance of one mitzvah exempts you from all the other mitzvahs of the Torah. Now, at the moment, I am wearing a tallis. I'm doing the mitzvah of tzitzis. Under my shirt, I have on a tallis. I am doing mitzvah, but I'm not actively doing it. I'm very passive. I'm not doing anything. It's just on me. The only time I'm actively doing the mitzvah is when I'm putting it on. During the time period when I'm putting it on, I'm actively engaged in the mitzvah of tzitzis. And if a poor person wants a charity, I'm exempt from the mitzvah of charity while I'm engaged in another mitzvah. Just having the talis on doesn't exempt me from the mitzvah of tzedakah, but active engagement in any other mitzvah does exempt me from the mitzvah of tzedakah, exempts me from every other mitzvah. While engaged in life-saving, which is a mitzvah, one is simply exempt from all the other mitzvahs of the Torah, whether it's tzedakah or all the mitzvahs of Leil HaSeder. You're simply exempt, and if you're exempt, you're exempt, and that's all there is to it. You don't have to do it. Since these are two mitzvahs which you cannot do simultaneously, life-saving and Leil HaSeder, unlike Talis, where I'm not actually doing anything. The Talis is on me. I'm not actively involved in it, and I can do Leil HaSeder perfectly well while I'm wearing a Talis. And if I can do two mitzvahs at the same time, because I'm not doing anything active with the Talis. So in any event, according to Rav Dovid Or, if you are engaged in pikuach nefesh, you're simply exempt from the mitzvah. Le'otam shechozrim b'layla acharei chatzot, Leil HaSeder should be completed, or at least the eating should be completed before chatzot, before midnight. What about the soldiers who are arriving back at base after midnight? or the nurses, the anesthetists whose shift ends after midnight, still nighttime. They can still do the mitzvahs. Yikayamu at mitzvahs achilas matzah mora, called dinei Seder. Let them fulfill all the mitzvahs of Leila Seder after their shifts. It's preferable lachatchila. One should do the mitzvahs before midnight. B'diavad, you can do the mitzvahs of Leila Seder after midnight until dawn. If you cannot do the mitzvah the correct way before midnight, at least do it in a way that you fulfill the mitzvahs after midnight, before dawn. Okay? That is the opinion of Rav Dovid Fink, which makes perfect sense, and the reasonableness of the halacha, the reasonableness of his position is itself compelling. Um, After all, the idea of svara, let's get that typed correctly on chat. The idea of svara, that the underlying reasoning for a halachic position is compelling, wherever the underlying reasoning for a halachic position is compelling, that in and of itself is sufficient to give Torah status to a halachic opinion. If the underlying reasoning is compelling, then of course HaKadosh Baruch Hu expects us to do what our intelligence requires of us. Anything which intelligence requires, anything which is anything which intelligence compels you to do is of Torah status. And well, I think that clearly applies to Rav Davlior's opinion here. This, of course, doesn't help for old people. Old people are not in life-threatening, well, in general, there's no life-threatening reason to do Leil HaSeder earlier. Let's take a look at the Divrei Yatziv. Kleisenberger Rebbe. Kleisenberger Rebbe, he survived the Holocaust, passed through New Jersey in North America for a period of time before ending up in Eretz Yisrael. In addition to having been one of the great Hasidic Rebbes of modern times, he was also one of the leading poskim whose opinions are very precious, not only in the Hasidic world, but throughout the world of Shomrei Torah. He quotes the Yavin Shmua, written by the Rashbats. You have all the details of the Rashbats on the screen here. He was from the 15th century North Africa. These are his words. Gam shtiyat arba kosot tzrich liot kulam achar tzeit kochavim. The Rashbats wrote, you have to have all the 4 cups after nightfall, after dark, when the stars have appeared. Ein minhag lidakdek because Kiddish mufisha mosifim b'Kiddish mechol. Nonetheless, the same Rashbats writes, Kiddish can be done a little bit earlier. Well, it's not only the Rashbats who said that you can begin Leil HaSeder a little bit earlier than the appearance of the stars. Ken Katav b'Chasam Sofer. You want an Ashkenaz name? A great rabbi from North Africa is not sufficiently weighty enough for you. You want an Ashkenaz name? The Chasam Sofer. Can't get any more Ashkenaz than him. He was from Frankfurt. After all, Frankfurt am Main. He ended up in Pressburg, which recently changed its name to Bratislava in the Slovakian Republic, in Slovakia. He wrote, Dafke le'achila kaptin, achetechshach. He wrote, you can begin Leil HaSeder earlier as long as the matzah will be after the appearance of the stars. Yarich b'sipurei Haggadah achetechshach. Say the Haggadah until it gets dark. That is, the stars have appeared. When the stars have appeared, then you can eat the matzah. Start as much earlier as you wish, and pace the timing, the rhythm, so that you'll get to matzah at the appearance of the stars, and that is sufficient. Makom yachol Kaddesh mishetishka achama. Make Kiddush earlier. That's okay, as long as the matzah is at night. Well, that surely is a position which is embraced both by Ashkenaz and Sephardic poskim, and therefore should be acceptable for both camps equally. The Minchas Yitzchak, Dayan Weiss, originally from, he was born in Poland, but he was a Dayan in Hungary before the Holocaust. After the Holocaust, he made his way to Manchester in England and then to Yerushalayim, where he became the head of the Eda Haredit in Meir Sha'arim. He wrote on the question of whether it's permissible to make Kiddish for sick people before nightfall, before the stars appear. Tavna Ladina, bottom line, halachic conclusion, he wrote, B'shas Chak, if you have difficulty in performing Leil HaSeder the correct way, beginning with Kiddish after the appearance of the stars, B'nogela Beit Cholim, for example, in a hospital or an old age home, or even an old person at home, Shapir, it's fine. Yesh Makom, there's plenty of room. L'smoch al Makilim, to rely upon the lenient poskim, to make Kiddish while it's still daylight outside, as long as you can delay eating the matzah until the appearance of the stars, and that will be fine according to him as well. Well, with this, we've surveyed the principal opinions of the poskim regarding the halachic details of the beginning of Leil HaSeder, Kaddesh, and in Yirtzeh Hashem, in our upcoming shiurim, we'll deal with the following elements in Leil HaSeder. Until then, I wish you a good week and eventually a Shabbat Shalom, and look forward to seeing you all again in the continuation of these shiurim. Shalom. You're welcome. Shalom, shalom. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're all welcome. You're welcome.